Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore in your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my stupendous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How are you doing today, Matt?
I will become a mystical force of stupendousness.
That almost feels Dr. Doomish, and I'm okay with that.
I'm just going for that, yeah. If you could get away with just going around constantly saying, Perez has spoken.
100%.
Absolutely.
I would do that. If I could do that in meetings, I would be the happiest person in the world. But we're not.
Rossi would like you to know this was a delicious sandwich.
Doom sees you. Yep. Anyway, we're not here to talk about our world domination or mystical plots in therein, or maybe we are. I don't know. We're going to see where the questions take us today, because we're going to be answering your questions, our wonderful listeners. So if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in to podcasts@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, and any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to hit us up on Discord, we have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open for everybody. However, if you are a Patreon subscriber, we have two special ways that you can get those questions or anything else to us, really. We have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel in Discord, where we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. And you can also just send us messages directly on Patreon. We do get those, and it's either going to be Liz or Dan that sends them to us from there. And speaking of Patreon, we are still doing a little bit of a Patreon drive right now. Beginning of the year is usually pretty hard for Patreons. Advertisements is a little bit lower as well. So we're a little bit below where we'd like to be for our numbers for Patreon. So if you're listening to our product and you can spare $1 or $3 or $5 a month, and you enjoy our content, we would really appreciate it if you consider supporting us at patreon.com/blizzardwatch.
Ozzy would thank you.
We will all thank you. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with some of our questions. So this one comes from Azurloon. Is there lore to support an Anu Tafemet sort of thing between Elune and Xal'atath? Is Zal the skin of evil shed by Elune and discarded into the void? Star Trek: The Next Generation episode clip inspired this question. Thanks as always. I don't know that there is a relationship between Elune and Xal'atath, but I will turn it over to Rossi and see if he's got any tinfoil to make a hat out of.
Rossi does not think there is any such. I'm going to stop now. It's intoxicating.
It's intoxicating.
You just want to keep going. I don't think there's much established that actually links Xal'atath and Elune. That doesn't mean they couldn't do it if they wanted to. I mean, they could be, right now there could be some people at the Blizzard writing staff team deal doing that if they wanted to. I just don't see a lot of it in the game as it currently stands. And by a lot of it, I mean, I don't see any of it.
Yeah, there's
nothing.
There's nothing to really kind of support that idea. However, it's
not that it's a bad idea. There's lots of interesting ways you could go with it.
Yeah.
And if they wanted to do it, by all means, go ahead. I'm just saying that, looking at the lore as it's currently established, I do not see any such connection at this time.
That said, it did let me go down an interesting thought route that I'm kind of curious if you've ever had this thought. And part of it is because I just got finished leveling a Lightforged Draenei Paladin. And I really started thinking about Naaru and their light and dark cycle, because we know they have one. And I'm curious, what do you think would happen if there was a way for the Naaru to sort of split that cycle off from themselves? Like, if there was a way that there was, they could never have to go into their dark cycle, they basically take that essence from them and split themselves, right? Like, they shed it sort of like this. What would that look like? What would that be?
Kaliamenethil.
Interesting. All right, go with this. I'm curious.
Well, here's the thing. That you were mentioning it's a life cycle. And, pronunciation jokes aside, if I could be like in a light cycle, what is this, Tron? But as you were talking about it, the first thing that came to mind was Kaliamenethil, because Kaliamenethil does not have a dark cycle. She is just the light animating her dead body. But living beings aren't just, like, we don't have a force animating our bodies, or more accurately, we don't have just one. And that's what got me thinking. We've talked a lot about the various forces in balance throughout Azeroth, and we are beings born of Azeroth. We are like fragments of Azeroth. And so that's one of the things I've been thinking about in terms of why humans and other mortal races of Azeroth, elves, dwarves, trolls, orcs, whatever, why they can defy those cosmically calculated odds Algalon talked about so long ago. Because they're nothing is alien to them. Their fel is weird and destructive, but it's not alien. We touch the twisting nether. We understand it. It can be a part of us. All of it is. And that got me thinking about, you're talking about, taking a Naaru, which is a living thing. Mm-hmm. A Naaru isn't a construct. It's not a creation. It's a living thing. And that got me thinking about, why do Naaru have that life cycle? Is that life cycle necessary for them to exist in our reality? Like, why do they have it? Why is it there? The creatures that come straight from the void don't have it.
Yeah, that's true.
The old gods don't have it. They do not live. They do not die. They are outside the cycle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But living and dying, those are two of the fundamental forces of reality. Life, death, light, dark, order and chaos, arcane and fel. If they're outside that cycle and they're pure fel, a being of pure light would also be outside that cycle, and therefore would also be essentially an undead thing. They're not undead in the state that they're not animated by death magic, but they're undead in the sense that they don't die. They do not live, they do not die, they are outside the cycle. That's true of every fel creature. I mean, not fel, void, but it's true of fel too, but we're not talking about them. It's true of every void creature, that they are not part of the cycle of life and death. To divorce yourself from the cycle of life and death in that way, you would become undead.
Mm.
And the Naaru are not undead. The Naaru are alive. And that means the Naaru can be hurt. They can die. They go from this one to the other. And so I don't know. Like, as I'm thinking about this, I started thinking about the fact that you wanted a connection between Elune and Xal'atath, and here's where I could make one. Because Elune is obviously somehow involved with the Naaru. It's just indisputable at this point that there is some connection between them. The Tear of Elune activated a prime Naaru, for lack of a better word.
And it's a pillar. It's a pillar of creation.
Yes. So Elune is here in the Naaru. Elune is part of them. In order for them to become part of creation, in order for them to exist as living things with a light side and a dark side, what do we see when we look at Elune? Elune's cycles are more extreme than the Naaru's. We've seen that there is a dark aspect to Elune. We've seen it. This is why I don't think Xal'atath is Elune's dark shadow, because Elune definitely did not rip out her darkness. Her darkness is there.
Yeah, and we see that
with
the
Dark Warrior.
Yeah, I was gonna say we see that with the Night Warrior, right?
Yeah, the Night Warrior is the darkness of Elune, and it's a powerful enough darkness that it can kill an old god because she did it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The first Night Warrior that we know of, that we meet in the Shadowlands, did. And when we see Tyrande giving into the Night Warrior, I keep wanting to say the Dark Warrior, but it's the Night Warrior, giving into the Night Warrior inside the Shadowlands, Elune stops it. And not because she's trying to save anyone, except that she is trying to save someone. She's trying to save Tyrande.
Yeah.
And directly, Elune loves Tyrande Whisperwind as a child. Doesn't want her to die. Doesn't want her. Picked Tyrande directly. She directly manifested during the War of the Ancients and said, no, not Maiev. Maiev would have been an okay choice, but no, this one. This is the most direct act of any, being
celestial being.
Yeah, most direct act of any of them we've ever seen.
Yeah,
until we saw Elune directly change a satyr into a night elf.
Yeah, like Elune is really the only entity at that scale that we've really seen directly interact, because I almost put Elune above Titans, right?
Whatever Elune is, it's certainly... I keep going back to the fact people kept asking, well, if Elune is this entity like this, how come she keeps calling the Winter Queen her sister? And I started thinking about that in terms of like what the Winter Queen actually is, what they all are. we've seen them as machines, as constructs, as blanks, essentially. There wasn't them, but it was the prototype thems that we saw.
Yeah, but they're more than that, right? They're mantles, they're powers, they're aspects.
But beyond all that, what is the Winter Queen if not death embracing life?
Yeah, death and rebirth, a cycle.
And yes, she is not, she is part of the cycle. She has actually made herself, it seems like she's made herself part of the cycle.
She's actually more of the cycle than the other pieces of the Shadowlands.
Yeah, exactly.
She's actually, if I'm thinking about it, now that you're saying it, and now that we're saying it out loud, she's the only active participant.
Yeah, but look at what the other ones are. Do we have Order? Yes.
Yeah.
He's
Bastion.
good old, yeah. Do we have, Death is everywhere. It's a Shadowlands, but
primarily Maldraxxus, yeah.
Yeah, but we've got Maldraxxus. The whole thing, it's like the Shadowlands is essentially, we kept looking at it in terms of its role in the cosmic machinery, but it's like, think of it not as that, but as a reflection.
Yeah, as a finite piece, almost.
Well, not even that. Like, literally think of, like, when we talk about a tesseract, a three-dimensional representation of a fourth-dimensional object, obviously we can't see all of it because we are three-dimensional beings.
Right.
But if you think about the reason that the orrery is reversed when you're looking in the Shadowlands book is because that's the way that it appears from the Shadowlands. When you're in the Death Realm, it looks like this. If you look at it from another realm, it would be altered to fit their perspective as well, because you can only see pieces of the whole grand design. If that's the case, and if we have the Winter Queen as one aspect of this, there could be another one in the Emerald Dream / life realm, for lack of a better word. There could be one in every possible creation, and then in this reality, there's Elune.
Mm.
And what Elune does is personify all these different aspects. Because Elune can reach out and tell an undead, yeah, you still count. You're still part of me. Because there's undead night elves right now who are reconnecting with Elune. Elune did not abandon them.
Yeah, and even further on that, right? Like this is something that I've been thinking about for a while that I think is actually fascinating about Elune. Elune is borderline omnipresent, right? Like the touch and the effect of Elune is very widespread and seems to be simultaneously widespread. And I don't know if that's because Elune has fragmented themselves into different aspects over time in order to do that, or if Elune is just an order of magnitude of that power that we just fully don't understand.
Here's another thing to think about when you're thinking about that, though, because that's a very good point. Elune can make her manifestation permanent in an area.
Yeah.
She can just decide, it's always night here, and I'm always here. Dark here. And it just happened, and it didn't go away. And it won't go away until Elune decides it should. And again, in terms of direct manifestations of power, like Sargeras has never done anything like that. None of the Titans have ever done anything like that.
Yeah.
And none of the old gods have ever done anything like that. So it's a really good point, not just to talk about the omnipresence of Elune, but also to think about what it signifies. And like I said, we've already seen that there is both a dark and a light side to Elune, but we also know there's a third side to her. There's the Elune as mother, the Elune as the, figure of protection and nurturing. There's Elune as the warrior, the destroyer. This needs to die and I will make it die. But there's also Elune as the psychopomp. Elune as the, for lack of a better word, the trickster figure who can put her people in the Shadowlands where they're not supposed to go.
Yeah.
Not that they're not supposed to go anywhere, but like
she directed them specifically to a region. Yeah. She had the power to bypass the Arbiter.
Yes, which means she has that connection to the realm of death, which would make her the sister to the Winter Queen, because it's a reverse.
Which makes a lot of sense when you're talking about the moon, right? Because the moon and dealing with the phases of it, and if the moon is a manifestation of that, it makes a certain amount of sense.
Well, plus, I mean, we see that Elune is a creature of light, but the moon reflects light, obviously. We see that, Elune is a creature who can create death as the Night Warrior, but is also a creature empowered by darkness, and which is the void.
Well,
We've also seen that Elune is a creature who can take beings to death. They can go as the Shadowlands, as a realm. But what about the fact that she could possibly be doing the same thing for other places as well?
yeah. So
Because, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a couple things that I think are really fascinating with this too. One is that, the moon doesn't actually produce light, right? Like a celestial body,
Yes,
it reflects
exactly.
it.
It reflects it.
Yes.
And what if Elune does that with everything?
Yes.
In fact, what if Elune is the mirror that you hold this mirror up to reflect back into all those places that can look into this reality? This is their connection back and forth. This is the mirror of all those things.
Well, you're on the same path, right? That I'm going here,
I'm
is
going to shut up now, and so you can actually
you're good. But I mean, I think it's interesting because Elune, being a representation of the moon and being sort of like this being that is associated with something that only reflects light, doesn't produce its own light. I think you're right, and that's kind of where I was going. Is it does make her almost like the ultimate mirror for the universe, but also the ultimate mirror for the cosmic entities that exist in the universe. Mm-hmm. It also is a really great way to sort of understand maybe her power scale a little bit. And the reason I say that is because if all she's doing is reflecting, every powerful entity that exists reflects that life off of Elune. It's why she can sit there and have a relationship with, why can't I remember her name now? In the pantheon of the Titans, help me out here.
Oh, Eonar.
Because she reflects that sort of same energy that Eonar gives, where it's this calm, ordered nature, but not in the same way of the other aspects of the pantheon. To Eonar's wild, untamed, unbridled nature, right? Like it's a perfect reflection. They balance each other. And look at the history of Elune too. What is, even with the Night Warrior, even with everything we know about the aspects of Night Elf history, basically all of it is Elune is a force of balance. And and
that's why you look at the druids who are supposedly, fully tied into the Emerald Dream in the natural world. They call upon Elune.
Yeah, because she's that aspect of balance.
Yeah, and that's where the Wildkin come from. The Boomkin for people.
Moonkin, Moonkin, Boomkin, Wildkin.
Moonkin
they're all the same.
Come from Elune. They were her chosen. They were elevated by her.
And what druid aspect is associated with that? The balance aspect, right?
Which is the one that does both damage. It can heal you or it can kill you.
But it also
it balances forces. It keeps those powers. Calling it balance, it's akin to watching a tightrope performance.
And that's exactly, it's interesting you say that, because mechanically that's what the spec wants to do too, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And I think is kind of, we have these weird moments where we stumble across where the design of the class is reflected in the lore or vice versa. And this is definitely one of those cases because of the way that the class works when it's balancing between sun and moon. You're literally moving a bar. Like you're balancing the aspects to do what you want to do damage wise. And I think that's absolutely fascinating because it is a perfect encapsulation of Moonkin being a force of balance for Elune. I think that's absolutely wild. Yeah,
it certainly is something you can. So I think that basically, I don't think that Xal'atath and Elune are linked in the sense of, Xal'atath is a part of Elune that got ripped out. But I do think that Elune has a connection to the void.
Yes.
And I think that means that Xal'atath could certainly be reflected by Elune in that way. That what Xal'atath is something that Elune could mirror, could show to Xal'atath or to us. So yeah, there's a lot to it. I don't see a lot of direct connection in the lore, but I do think that there's places you could certainly insert it.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more of it coming into Midnight. I think Elune's probably going to be
next one. Yeah.
I think Elune's going to be a little more present than she is right now, and I think part of that is, part of it is because of the lead up to the Titans, but I also think part of it is simply because I think Elune is possibly the only cosmic force that could probably deal with whatever Xal'atath is actually doing. And
and for that matter, we might find out that there are other beings like Elune that do the opposite of what she does. Like there could be one that is the projection in the way that she reflects everything. Maybe there's one that projects everything. There's one that literally is like, imagine a Naaru that switched between switched from light to void to fel to arcane to life to death. There could be one that does that. We don't know. We have no idea. But there's an interesting way to look at what Elune's role has always been in WoW and in Warcraft before that. Elune has always been like a direct, I don't know how to put it, like there's a conduit role, like more so than anything else. Elune is about becoming, and we've seen that with what happened with the satyr that wanted to turn itself, it wanted to be a night elf again, and Elune allowed it to become one. Tyrande wanted revenge, but what she needed was something else, and Elune allowed her to pursue her revenge, but in the end allowed her to achieve something else, allowed her to balance herself. And that's, in order to balance things, you have to change. There's a kind of, goes back to the psychopomp role. You could again look at it like sort of like a trickster figure. In order to achieve what you're trying to do, sometimes you have to change. Change is a big part of all this stuff we're talking about. And that, I think, is what Elune really embodies.
Yeah, I mean,
as moon phases.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with the moon phases and being in aspects of the moon, it makes a strange amount of sense. I think that she would be the embodiment of change.
Yeah, chaos bringer. And that's where the fel stuff might come in, because in order to make change, in order to transform, there has to be chaos. Things have to be, they can't be as ordered. And order itself is a fascinating thing. We require it. It's necessary for everything to exist. But if there's too much of it, nothing ever changes, and there's no point to existence. So yeah, I there's a lot you could do with what Elune and her role with all sorts of things is. Not just Xal'atath. For that matter, I'd really like to see some more straight up focus on what Xal'atath really is. And I'd love to find out that it's not just some old god fragment, but its own unique kind of void thingy. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think we're going to get more of that. I mean, we're still at the beginning of the expansion. We're moving into the second tier of rating right now, which is, while it is going to be focused more on goblins, I'm very confident Xal'atath will be poking her nose around there at some point. It's a thing that just never goes away. Which is all going to lead up to midnight. So I think we're going to find out more about Xal'atath, but I think it's interesting, just because, and I never really thought of this before this question, which is Xal'atath is ostensibly the counterpoint to Elune in some regards, where Elune is that constant change, but also balance. Xal'atath is pure imbalance. Every piece of history about Xal'atath, everything that Xal'atath has done has been pushing the teetering point of balance just a little bit away from center, right? Like all the stuff when she was with Modgood, or all the stuff of all the previous holders. Yeah. I mean, even the stuff right now, like look at with the Ansurek, but the Void Disc. The Void Disc was used for capturing power, pure power, which is how Khadgar survived. And why would she need that if it wasn't just to capture that power and use it to push the balance further? And it reminds me of like a void cat just sitting on a shelf, just very gently pushing that glass towards the edge. And eventually that's gonna hit a point where somebody's going to have to intervene. And I have a feeling that it will be possibly Elune or a champion of Elune that will step in. But I don't know if there's much more to say about that. We could probably spend an entire episode just tinfoil hatting about Xal'atath and other stuff, which I'm sure y'all would enjoy, but I think we're going to move on to our next one. This one, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, yeah, that makes sense. But then I'm like, why do I need to say that? He knows.
All right, this one comes from Verdigree. I was watching Thor 2, and that MCU Odin straight up said, "We aren't gods." Kind of a killjoy. I prefer the magic. Theologically speaking, do you consider the Warcraft Titans gods? If they're a pantheon, well, that's a theon right there in the name. Are they closer to your definition of a god than D&D's ones because they aren't fueled by belief and fighting for henotheistic fans like sports teams and just exist whether anyone believes them or not. Well, Verdigris, I'm going to throw a grenade out here and just kind of let Matt go because I have a feeling he's probably going to come to this anyway. But this reminds me more of the Jack Kirby's New Gods than it does actual deities from D&D. And I don't know if Matt agrees with me or not, but I'm kind of curious to shake that and let it loose.
Well, thematically, the Titans from WoW are essentially taking two different Jack Kirby ideas and sort of eating them both at the same time. It's kind of like if you took his Fourth World stuff and his Celestial stuff and were like, why not put your hands together? Because the Titans are very much like the Celestials from Marvel in that they come to a world and they're like, ooh, let's play with it. And then they just do all sorts of random stuff and then they take off to see what happened. Before the whole Sargeras deal. And then the Sargeras thing is also very much like the Celestials in that there was the dreaming Celestial who went mad and they had to stop him. And in so doing, they made things worse, infinitely worse for everybody involved, including themselves. But it's also it's also like the Fourth World stuff because the Titans aren't gods. Well, all right, I'm just going to use this line. It's from a game I've been playing a ton lately. Joe will recognize it. But it's like, in terms of their power compared to ours, they are gods, terrifying gods. It doesn't matter if they are gods or even what a god is. In terms of the scale of your interaction with them, they are gods. They are capable of altering, reshaping, and channeling forces on levels we simply cannot even comprehend. Yeah. That doesn't mean that, but at the same time, if they were really gods, like beings that transcend all concepts that we can conceive of, then they're not that because they can die, they can change, they can become other things in a way that gods simply don't seem to be able to do. But again, this is all. I mean, you could sit here and like pull apart actual real world mythology and say, but look, this one dies in this myth and this happens. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But that's also part of the problem, right? We're trying to define something that is indefinable. The nature of what it is to be a god is inherently. Now I'm quoting another thing. Goes, do you mean I have to die in order to have any kind of insight, to understand your insights on death? It's like the context isn't there. We don't know. Like it's like a bunch of amoebas trying really, really hard to understand multicellular life forms. Yeah. It's not that they're both life forms, but one's up there and we're down here. I'm not trying to be like a slug. And you hit on something that I think is kind of important that I think really kind of nails the direction of this question. And I think really kind of defines it, especially with the Titans, right? It's a comparison in scale of power. And I think it's interesting because if you go talk to a random farmer from, the Kingdom of Stormwind, he's never seen battle, never, like, he's maybe seen like militia work or something like that. And then you on your flying fire dragon swoops in all ablaze with the sun shining down on you with weapons pure, like pouring pure light and power. And you walk over and you just resurrect his dead horse because you're feeling magnanimous in that moment. You're a god to that person in scale of power. And then for you, what does that scale to you? And maybe that is the Titans at their full power, but we've also beaten a Titan. So are Titans gods to some people? Yeah, but like a virus can absolutely kill a human.
Yeah, 100%.
But a human is still a human and a virus is still a virus. It's just that, the scale is so off kilter that even as this tiny, not even fully a life form thing can kill a human, it doesn't change the fact that the human is and was a human, and it is really weird to think about in terms of like trying to even define what a god is in World of Warcraft. A god just seems to be a term someone can use to describe themselves. And at best you can argue with it, but you can't prove them wrong at a certain point.
It's a thing that I think media struggles with in general. And the reason I say that is and I'm going to make a comparison here, and I'm going to go back to comic books, not just because of the New Gods, but because of stuff that's currently happening in Marvel's universe. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, but one of the interesting storylines was revolving around Venom and Carnage essentially becoming gods. And it was this whole thing with what is time, what is power, what does that mean? Is there a cycle? Why does this repeat itself? Where Eddie Brock basically created a pocket dimension which he was all powerful as the King in Black, as the Lord of all symbiotes, essentially, where he became this being called Meridius. And Meridius, to all intents and purposes, is a god of the symbiotes, has complete control over it, creates a zombie plague of symbiotes again, that are completely at his beck and call. And while he's doing this, Carnage is traveling through the multiverse, killing aspects of Venoms to absorb their strengths and eliminate his own weaknesses, and even gets his hand on the Necro Sword, except it becomes the spear, and so he can kill Meridius if he so chooses. It is as powerful, but doesn't have that control over the symbiotes in the same way, just has none of the weaknesses therein, and is so powerful, in fact, that the symbiote itself can reconstitute the human cells of Cletus Cassidy, who's been dead and turned to dust for ages. By definition, those are both gods. However, in Marvel's own universe, the Celestials would just eat them alive. And above the Celestials, the one above all and the one below all would absolutely trounce them. And there are...
Well, you're actually skipping the Living Tribunal.
I haven't even touched the Living Tribunal. But
for that matter, Galactus
Yeah?
is more powerful than the Celestials. He's been shown to be able to do that. Yet Galactus can be defeated by a bunch of humans with a box. A sufficiently powerful box can defeat Galactus.
Yeah. It's a weird scale. And I think what I wanted to get to is, I think Warcraft in general, since it's moved to Warcraft 3 in particular, and moving into World of Warcraft and beyond, has, outside of the old gods, does not really use the term god, right? Even with calling them a pantheon is just a conglomeration of power of, essentially they're all together in mind, in purpose. Essentially, you could make a pantheon of archmages if you wanted to. The Seven of Dalaran, right?
Yeah, we don't want to obscure the fact that pantheon literally means pantheos, all gods.
Yes,
just like pandemonium means all demons. But at the same time, we hear all the time the pantheon of these sports legends. It's like those sports legends aren't literally gods.
Yes,
Wade Boggs is not a deity.
I mean,
you
literally
do not have to pray to him.
I was going to say, because literally one of the modern day definitions of pantheon is a group of particularly respected, famous, important, or powerful people. Right.
Yeah. And its power derives from the fact that it means all gods in Greek, but it's used just to mean all these figures that are of note or importance to this specific use. And I do think also it's worth considering that in the case of this, like when we're talking about World of Warcraft / Warcraft, there is always another rung on the ladder, and it seems very fractal. Like when the first ones were introduced, we still don't know much at all about them. Like we don't know, like, were they concrete physical beings? Did they did they just walk around? It's theoretically possible the first ones could have been mortal beings that just had really advanced insight into the creation of a new existence.
I mean, look at it in terms of like Stargate, right? What were the gods that of the Egyptian pantheon there? They were alien beings of incredible technological advancement, and they were heralded as gods. And even in like going to the MCU and talking about Thor and stuff like that, in effect, they are gods. You got to be upfront with that too. Yes, Odin says we're not gods, but at the same time, at one point, Thor goes to a gigantic meeting of all the pantheons, including the Greek gods, and they're called gods, and they call each other gods. So I feel like it's similar to like when Superman tells people, "I'm not a god," and someone I remember this was actually Batman who was like, "Okay, Clark, you can see everything happening on the world at once if you want to. You can move faster than light.
You're practically impossible to kill.
Remember that time Superman held up the world for Atlas so he could go to his daughter's wedding?
Yeah. Or that time Superman stopped the moon from colliding with an evil moon that someone had made, or when he beat up an angel while he didn't even have his powers, like he had the lightning powers instead, and he still figured out how to like whoop an angel's butt with them.
There was a
angel.
There was a speaking of that too, it just reminded me of this as well. There was a recent one. I think it was again Dark Knight Returns, but it was later on in that line where Superman had a daughter and a son with Wonder Woman, and the Bottle City. Why can't I remember the name of it? I can't remember, but there was a Bottle City
Kandor.
Thank you.
Bottle City is Kandor. If you want to know a Superman thing, if I don't know it, I will cry.
This is a reason why I love Matt, because he remembers all the stuff that I can about Superman, and I'm the Spider-Man guy. Yeah. But in the Frank Miller universe, the Bottle City of Kandor is released, and they all become tyrants. Like they all believe that they are gods, and they come to Earth to cleanse it of humanity unless they decide to serve them. And it's this interesting thing where it's like Batman, who's old at this point, needs to be thrown into a Lazarus pit, because that's the thing that happens to Batman regularly at this point. When he's having this conversation with all those that are fighting back against it, he's like, we can't fight them directly. They are gods. However, we can do this, and somebody, and I think it's his Robin, and I can't remember her name. Carrie, thank you.
Carrie Kelly, by the way.
Yes. With the full name. Carrie Kelly goes, you don't believe in God? And he's like, no, but I believe in him. And they go and get Superman because he's the only one that can deal with this. Because even on an order of magnitude among Kryptonians, he's still a god.
Yeah, because it's not just about raw power. Can another Kryptonian give Superman a fight? Yes, but they're not gods the way he is, because he embodies something.
He's an icon. He's an ideal.
He's a personification in a way that they just aren't. It's one of the things I always liked about this whole idea, going back to the Warcraft version, in that there are religions in this world that are all about worshiping things that we know aren't gods. Except, are they? Would you say that an ancient is a god? Is one of the August Celestials a god? Now,
Loas?
you could certainly you could argue they're not. Yeah, Loas. You could argue that they're not as powerful as other entities, but does that matter? If you've got, say, the Jade Serpent, Ulan, or what I'm trying to think of, like the two death gods from the Loa, Muzala and
Bwamsandi.
Oh, bloody heck! Thank you, Bwamsandi. Those two. Are you going to tell me that they're not gods? Does it matter that Muzala worked for the jailer?
Does it matter that Bwamsandi worked for Muzala?
Yeah, and then you obviously decided he wasn't doing that anymore. Like, it's not just about power. It's about embodying a role.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it too. Like, I think you're absolutely right on that. Where, like, theologically speaking, even in like D&D, right? If we want to break this down, because why the heck not? We're here. Let's talk about it. It was part of your question. It's when you look at the Pantheon, even if you want to play Baldur's Gate 3, right? And you look at it and you look at how people become gods, like there's an ending where Gale becomes a god. Not because people worship Gale, but because Gale takes on a mantle of power and then finds worshipers afterwards. And that's true of all of the D&D pantheons. Everything that you see there is a mantle. It's a power. It's an ideal. It's a portfolio. And there are actual whole modules, especially if you want to go through like the Spelljammer stuff or the stuff with bloody heck, why can't I remember it now? Torrent. And you want to go through Planescape and look at like the Astral Sea and the fact that there are dead husks of gods that float through the Astral Sea, that if you find them, you can take that power and assume that mantle and portfolio.
And that's actually really, it's even in Baldur's Gate 3, you go to those. At one point you are on a dead god.
Yeah.
And what's also interesting about that too is like even entities we know full bore straight up no are not really gods. Like the Lich Queen, Vlaakith. Xal'atath is not a deity. Xal'atath is a being that had a mortal birth and did not ascend to any other realm. But in terms of her power over her society, they worship her.
Might as well be a god. Yeah, they worship her.
Yeah, they worship her, and she can grant them spells.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna switch this over to another game that I think has really good insights on what a god is, and that's Dragon Age Veilguard, the Veilguard, because one of the things I love about this game is how it simultaneously has people saying they're not gods and yet calling them gods, and it's like I go back to that line I said earlier. In terms of their power compared to ours, they are gods, wrathful, terrifying gods, and that's something I think is worth considering, not just in terms of power, but in terms of perspective. In the Warcraft cosmology, perspective is another aspect of this whole thing. It's not just about how powerful you are; it's about how much you see and interact with.
Yeah, and think about. I was gonna say, think about that too. Like until Shadowlands, what was our view? What was it that we actually? And I'm gonna air quote here, knew existed. Like our perception of reality and our perception of how the universe was and our perception of the power spheres that exist within that universal framework were proven immediately wrong as soon as Shadowlands hit. Everything we had thought we had known up to that point was shattered. And it's like, if you go to the Shadowlands Grimoire, that's like the biggest point that book has, is that you are attempting to put context to systems and powers you do not understand with your limited understanding. You are attempting to essentially make sense in your brain of something that essentially doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you are a flatlander trying to figure out what a three-dimensional object stepping on flatland is. Like, is it round? It's square? Wait, it's changing shape. It's not changing shape. It's passing through the two-dimensional plane. And you don't understand that because you are, a triangle. It is the concept of scale, not just in terms of, they're bigger than us, but in the sense of they're perceiving from here. This is their vantage point. Your vantage point is over here.
Yep.
And it does not see what they see. So that is the perception aspect of it is really big in Warcraft. And it's fascinating that you get to the point where you actually have cosmic forces that are inimical to each other entirely just because of how they perceive reality. Like, there's only one true way to go. No, every possibility is real. And we're going to fight over it. Yes, but I will win. And some of them you'll win, and others we win. No, it'll always be me. These guys, their fight is about how to view existence. And that's the whole deal. And that's the same for Fel versus Arcane. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, no, you're fine. I was going to say, and think about this too. In our very limited exposure to the universe and Warcraft, we have seen the Emerald Dream, we have seen the Shadowlands, and that's it, right?
Well, we've been to pieces of the Twisting Nether, so we've seen a little bit of the Fel aspect.
And again, that depends on what the Twisting Nether is, and that's a whole topic for our show by itself.
Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, also we have the Twisting Nether versus the Great Dark Beyond. My point is that we have little tiny little pieces of other places shown to us too, which just serves to actually reinforce your point in that all we know about these places now is how much we don't know about these places.
Yeah, and I was going to say, but even beyond that, there's certain aspects that we have not been exposed to, but we know exist because of Shadowlands now. Spheres of the arcane, spheres of spirit, spheres of life, spheres of death, spheres of decay, spheres of the basic primordial elemental powers that exist throughout the entirety of the universe. We've seen little tiny aspects of them, like a lot of people say that, well, we went to the Firelands. That's the realm of fire. No, that's the prison of fire that was created specifically to house fire elementals. That wasn't the primordial plane of fire that exists somewhere in the universe. We haven't been to the heart of Fel. We haven't been to a lot of these places. We haven't been to the heart of light, the heart of disorder, the heart of the void. We might get to these places, but inside of each of these places are likely to be beings beyond our comprehension, or powers, or mantles, or aspects of powers that blow away the Titans, or blow away everything we've seen so far. Maybe not Elune, and that's a throwback to the first one. We don't know about that yet. But we've never seen the Void Lords. We don't know what their power scale is.
We don't even know what their existence is like.
Yeah.
Because the Void Lords are entities that hate existence.
Yeah.
They don't like the concept of, okay, this place is this. The Void Lords want to just, it all should be vague and up to the observer. And there shouldn't be any concrete reality at all. And the fact that you keep trying to make concrete reality hurts us, and we don't like it. And think about what that would mean for them in terms of trying to meet them. How do you meet a being that does not want to have a singular fixed existence? That's some Doctor Strange stuff right there.
Yeah,
that's right up there. In terms of, like, of all things, the end of the Doctor Strange original movie, not the sequel. The bit where he figures out, oh, I can beat Dormammu by enmeshing him in concepts he does not want to understand.
He binds him to time.
Yeah, which is something that doesn't exist for Dormammu. So he doesn't understand what is happening. Like, why does this keep? I killed you. Why am I still here? Why, everybody else who was in that time thing would not have been able to recognize they were in it. They would have just repeated like everybody else was repeating. But Dormammu was outside of time, so Dormammu recognized immediately, this is not supposed to be happening to me.
This is not what I'm used to.
Yeah. And it is that perspective, that fact that you can have beings that you in a cosmological, urination contest, who knows would win. They're not Pokemon.
No, it's all that to say that, again, going back to the core concept, the idea of godhood in Warcraft and in true and just media in general is malleable, right? It's all a matter of perspective and where you are on that line of power. And going back to the root of it, I think Matt nailed it on the head. What is an ant to a man? What is a man to a god? Right? What does that mean? What are those scales of power? Right?
Yeah, like you can look at ants and say, individually, I am far more powerful and terrifying than any ant. But get a bunch of ants together and they can be a nightmare. And they can absolutely kill people.
Yep.
They have done so. It's like the old thing. This is an internet meme I've always found really amusing. Joe's probably heard of it, and he'll probably remember it better, but I'm still going to try and talk about it for a second because I think it's worth considering. Imagine you're just out going for a walk. You're walking around your neighborhood, and suddenly, you're passing by a tree, and you hear a tiny, tiny little voice go, Joseph Perez. And you're like, what the? Am I in trouble? Why is someone using my full name? I'm assuming they'd also use your middle names, but I don't think I know all of them.
And we're not going to put that on. We're not going to subscribe that to audio.
Yeah. But so you stop and you look around, and there's a tiny, tiny little ant that has put a circle around you. A circle, it's like in various kinds of detritus that ants find really important. Now, you could step right out of that circle if you wanted to, but you're curious. How does this ant know your name? What does it want? So you stop for a second, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's me. What's going on? And the ant wants you to do things for it. It wants you to I wish to be the most powerful ant in my hive. So you're like, okay, who's the current most powerful ant in your hive? Okay, the queen. So you go up to an ant hive and you take a stick and you jam it in there, and you have to kill like 30 or 40 ants per jam, but eventually you get the queen. And you're like, okay, yeah, you're the most powerful ant in your hive now, I guess. Because you got me to do that, and none of the other ants could get me to do that. And from the perspective of the ant, you are a horrifying, terrible occult force that has, but from the perspective of humans, you're kind of a little bit of a jerk. You just wanted to see what would happen. Now, imagine in other words, like, some things are easy, like the ants are like, bring us sugar. You're like, okay, here's a box of sugar, dump. But one time the ant's like, I want this ant to love me. And you're like, okay. So you kill every other ant around. Now she's got no choice but to love you. It's just you and her. And the ants will go, oh, what did I do? What have I done? I didn't understand. And it's like
not like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Think of it from that perspective. Is the human a god? No. But might not the human might as well be a god to those ants? Absolutely. Could an army of army ants still kill that human? Yes.
And think about it in terms of, like, in Warcraft terms too. Like,
we've beaten Titans, but that doesn't mean the Titans aren't Titans.
Correct. And like, if somebody worships the Titans as deities and sees us whoop them, does that mean they start worshiping us as deities because we just punch their gods? Maybe, because we're that powerful to them. That's the way they view us. Are we gods? No, probably not. We wouldn't consider ourselves gods. I don't know. Some of you might in your RP. I don't know. Y'all make those choices.
That's up to you. Whatever you do in your own game. But
again, if you were to ask like the Pantheon, if there were no other beings in the universe and you ask them, are they gods? They probably wouldn't have any idea what that is. Or if they did, they wouldn't consider themselves gods because they know there's things more powerful than they are. That's just the reality. And for that matter,
there are things that are not even more powerful than they are, but which they respect. And they don't consider themselves superior to those beings. Mm-hmm. And it is, again, a lot of it is perception, both the perception of the worshiper and the perceptions of the worship.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's very important to note that, again, Warcraft, if you go back and look at the writing, especially after Warcraft 3, starting with Warcraft 3, so after Warcraft 2, there isn't a whole lot of God. I'm air quoting that. While there are vestiges of it, these are words that can be used interchangeably. Again, like Pantheon. Pantheon doesn't necessarily just mean gods, even in modern day language. And so when they say it, they're not just saying gods. The only thing that still has a god moniker, really, are the old gods. Even the
Elune.
And the Elune as a goddess, and the wild gods, and I'm air quoting the wild gods.
Yeah, but for that matter, you might be air quoting Elune too, because there's no sign that Elune has ever told anyone that they are a god.
Yeah, or demanded worship, or whatever the case is. The worship just happened, right? I mean, it's an interesting thing to consider. And as you're making your way through the rest of this expansion, and as we move into Midnight, I'd say keep that in mind. And again, it's really hard to compare it to something like D&D, where a god is just something that carries the portfolio. And even then, it doesn't necessarily have to be worshipped.
Yeah, and depending on which D&D we're talking about, you can even have gods die and be replaced by somebody else entirely, who then becomes that god.
Looking at you, Mistra.
Yeah, there's been like 4 Mistras.
Yeah.
It's like, it's one of the reasons why it's not as crazy.
There's been like 7 Ogmas.
yeah, it's just okay. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I want you to think of it for a second. Just imagine that Elune is not this omnipresent divine force, but is this being that one day wandered by a planet, and the weird looking little tiny things on it just loved the heck out of her, and she was like, I mean, I am pretty. Let's see what they're up to. Like, we don't know how they view us.
Yeah. And we've never had a direct conversation with Elune. The closest that we've ever gotten to it was Tyrande. And even then, it wasn't a direct conversation.
No, it was Tyrande, who's kind of like plugged into Elune juice at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, again, just something to keep in mind that in Warcraft, God doesn't necessarily mean uppercase G type of God. It may just mean sufficiently powerful being that deserves your respect, or it might sit on you.
I'm going to throw this one out there because in honor of Liz, who is not actually here, but in Mass Effect 2, we get the line, a god isn't some weird old dude who lives in the sky. A god is an idea. It's a verb.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to want to do these things. It just does it. And that's something to consider when you're talking about beings like that. The Titans maybe don't have to consider doing things so much as those things happen because the Titans are there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something to think about, especially with the Void Lords and the Old Gods. Old Gods in particular are very much, I don't have to necessarily do anything. This stuff just happens because I'm here. They can be like a gravity well, except instead of gravity, it's insanity. They're an insanity well. You get close enough, you get pulled in. So there's a lot of back and forth, up and down, all sorts of stuff to talk about in this stuff. But I think the best possible analogy we can use is that in Marvel Universe, the one above all is literally Jack Kirby.
Yeah, 100%.
The creative god of the entire universe and his Dark Shadow are both just Jack Kirby.
They're just both aspects of Jack Kirby.
Yeah. So
keep that in mind. I think that's a good place to end it, though. Friends, I do want to thank you and remind you that Blizzard Watch is made possible Due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch, your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q&A ads free site experience. Again, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to hit us up on Discord, we have the Q and Podcast Questions channel set aside for you to do so. Same rules apply. If you are a Patreon subscriber, we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel. We tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. And if you don't want to hit us up on Discord or email, and you are a Patreon subscriber, you can send those questions in or whatever you want as far as like themes for the show, ideas, comments, anything like that through our Patreon messages, and Dan or Liz will ensure that we get them. But with that, folks, we'll see you next week, where we're going to probably be talking about some goblins, because I think it's goblin season.
Rossi requests it.